Hey, Ali, thanks for your video reply in week 9, and love what you've kind of highlighted is how the letter is coming together at the end of Romans 11, and then I'll try to say some things here about Agamben as well. But I just wanted to pause because I think the way you're talking about remnant body of Christ um, is consonant with Paul's way of getting at these things. You know, we are often in our day kind of obsessed with drawing the definite boundaries of things in order to supposedly know what they are, for them to be real or true. But I don't think that is the way the people of God is or the body of Christ is. Um, In fact, Paul is, I think, as you rightly say, not sort of dividing all of Israel into two neatly distinct groups, one the remnant and the rest the hardened, as if Paul were like conducting a census of Israel in that sense. There's a reason why God actually warns Israel against conducting a census in the Old Testament, why David is punished so severely for doing that, why that's remembered as something that the devil encouraged, or the Satan literally, to do. It's this obsession that we have with counting things and fitting things into neat boxes that doesn't reflect how things actually are as God shapes them as living things. So I was just glad to hear that, and I think that has all kinds of implications for how we go about our calling as Christians, the way that we promote our church community lives. We sometimes do need to stand against things, obviously, but uh, if what that leads us to do is to imagine ourselves as some kind of neatly discrete entity that can be set over against something else or others, then I think it will not serve us well and it will not be true. So there's a sense in which being the people of God and the distinctions within the people of God, being the church within the wider people of God, is always emergent, you know, always growing and acquiring its shape, never something that we can sort of freeze frame and define with certain abstract criteria. All right, so that's just a great, I think, let's call it a theological, methodological sensibility that I'm hearing coming through that I think, as I say, is consonant with um, Paul's argument here and elsewhere as well. Now, Agamben, first of all, what you said about the remnant really, I think, cuts to the heart of what Agamben is trying to do. So, um, when when Agamben talks about the remnant, one of the things that he's at pains to emphasize is kind of what you suggested, that the remnant Paul appeals to is not some discrete number of Jews that, happen to be Christian or something like that, as if it would serve Paul's argument to define Israel in that way. Instead, the remnant is this emerging reality within Israel, distinct from other parts of Israel, but not absolutely so, you might say, only relatively so. And the key, of course, for Paul is that this remnant signals um, the ongoing purpose that God has for the rest of Israel and therefore for all of Israel. So the remnant doesn't have any kind of independent existence or meaning. It exists only in relation to the rest. What Agamben wants to draw from this is a really kind of generative political concept, namely that any way in which we try to consolidate a population with a political structure, with a law, with a political identity, with a mythology or story, um, it will always be inadequate. There will always be a part of the population that bears witness to something that exceeds any such structure. And that for Agamben is itself, you might say, the driver of politics, the source even of political energy. It's this undefinability that human community continually produces that forces political change, revision, restructuring, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that for Agamben is key to what the messianic is, according to Paul, because the messianic is precisely what cannot be defined or fit into some established social structure or conceptual structure. It's always breaking things open. So that's a little bit about Agamben. There's also something in his article that you might have found difficult where he's talking about, this myth of Apelles' cut. Um, and without getting too deep in the weeds, I would just say that he's trying to show how, for Paul, um, even being Jewish is never something that can be described um, with one term or according to one criterion. So, whereas you might be able to describe the Jewish community to some extent according to the flesh, that will never capture all of the Jewish community. It will never capture all of any one Jew. It just can't get at the whole Jewish reality. And so that's where he sees Paul as effectively uh, insisting on an even deeper way of describing the Jewish life according to the Spirit. Now, some people emerge from Agamben thinking that Paul has done something kind of like what they think Paul's doing with the remnant, sort of dividing the Jews into two neat classifications, the Jews according to the flesh, which are not real Jews, and the Jews according to the Spirit, which are the real Jews. And Agamben, I think, rightly perceives that Paul is doing something far subtler than that. So that's just another way in, I think, to what Agamben is doing and tracing kind of Paul's thought and how he presents the reality of the Messiah in the letter. So I hope that helps. But what we might emerge from that with, just as we think about Romans, what we're using it for, is going back full circle really to what I was talking about at the beginning, with the emergent nature of the Christian community, the wider people of God, the revelation of God in the world. Um, we don't want to settle for just one term of description or one criterion that we use to define things. Um, we want to always be sort of cultivating multiple ways of describing people, ourselves, our differences, our difficulties, so that we don't oversimplify what's actually happening and then turn that into a kind of weapon. Now, this can, I think, produce something undesirable, which is this sort of like, well, then we never have anything to say, and every claim we make dies the death of 1,000 qualifications. So, I think we can push this kind of sensibility so far as to never be able to take a stand, or never be able to make important assertions that sometimes we do need to make. So that's not what we're after. But we just want to be sort of cautious about when we are going to take a stand, when we are going to make really definite claims about things, that we're taking into account the emergent quality of what we're trying to describe. Um, and as Christians, especially, I would say we're taking into account how we are always implicated in what we say we are not. That I think is Paul's teaching in Romans, implicitly, more explicitly in First Corinthians. Thanks again for a great reply. Hope you have a good week 10. I think we're going to have one last in-person gathering on Friday if that time works for you. go out for some drinks to celebrate the end of the class. But if not, hope you have a great week and see you in one way or another soon.